Hey everybody, welcome to the Clicks and Creators podcast. I'm your host Hiram Perry, and today we have Edwin Stafford with us. He is a marketing professor at Utah State University and has a impressive marketing professional career, focusing mostly on sustainability and green initiatives. He kickstarted the wind power initiative here in Utah and has done a lot of clean air initiatives throughout his career. His recent focus has been on making induction stoves cool, and what we'll mostly be talking about today is the 2034 Winter Olympic Games and how we can prepare for those here in Utah and how we can get the air to be clean so it's not a shameful event. It's a prideful event when those Olympic Games come. How are you doing today, Edwin?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me and allowing me to share my research and work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. I mean, the focus today is going to be on those 2034 Winter Olympic Games and what's the connection of the Olympics and the marketing world?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that you can think about is the Olympics. We always think about as sports and idea of being persistent and excellence and things of that nature. But the reality is that the Olympics is a great big marketing platform. You think about all the opportunities that companies have to market their brands, to become sponsors. Coca-Cola, for example, McDonald's was a big sponsor for many years. And being able to advertise and to have that global reach. And so that's been a very important marketing angle for this. And also, what I've been doing over the years is looking at how cities have been able to use the Olympics as a way to market the brands of their cities. And so I think one of the key things with Salt Lake, when we first got the Olympics back in 2002, was that this was going to introduce Utah and Salt Lake City to the world. Many of the people back then, this is over 30 years ago, when we were first making that first bid, we wanted to showcase Salt Lake City as a world-class city for our tourism and for skiing and winter sports. And the goal was to make Utah an Olympic hub, or a place that people who were working on athletics could come to Utah and experience actual, Olympic facilities in order to train on. And
Mhm.
so that has clearly 2002 established Utah in that way. And one of the reasons we got the 2034 Olympics is because we already had all of our outstanding venues in place, and we've maintained them. And we've had a lot of competitions and things since then. And so Utah now is well recognized as a place for winter tourism. And it's been fantastic for our economy, and it's been great for our brand.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge opportunity not just for large corporations to advertise, but also for for cities, for Salt Lake, for whatever city is hosting the Olympics so we did that the first time 2002, and as far as I know, there's still a lot of, I mean, we still have all the facilities, and I think a lot of Olympians still train here, right?
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Um, so I guess I mean we kind of went through this already, what the connection of Olympic Olympics with marketing host cities. Um, I guess we've talked about like what's positive and what positive things can come from hosting the Olympics in your city, but what are some risks that you see in
Absolutely.
marketing risks
And
for Olympic hosting?
and I would say that what got me back into thinking about this, I studied the Olympics starting, believe it or not, in the 1990s,
Mhm.
uh, and was looking at the Sydney Olympics, the 2000 Sydney Olympics in the summer, and was looking at what are some of the opportunities that can happen in terms of sustainability as of using the Olympics as a platform to advance sustainability. Um, And so one of the negatives that can come up is that if the city has some kind of negative things that happen during the games. And so I would say that watching the 2024 games in Paris, I mean, for the most part, that was a fantastic event. But there was one black eye, and that was the Seine River. And that's the river that goes through Paris. A lot of people view it as one of the most romantic places that you can go to when you want to go to the Olympics. Or when you want to go to Paris, you want to stroll with your loved one, along the banks of the Seine River.
Hmm.
And what people don't realize is that's an incredibly polluted river. And part of it is just because the infrastructure there dates back, hundreds of years, and really it's not been updated. And so we get a lot of raw sewage that mix into water
Mm.
runoff into that Seine River. And so what happened was during the games, they had to, at first, they canceled the swimming portion of the men's triathlon because the water was too polluted. They tested the bacteria levels and it was not good enough. And then it was just postponed because they were able to get bacteria levels down to a point where it was considered to be safe. But then we had some other swimmers that went into the water and then they got sick. Now, there was some controversy as if those swimmers really did get sick because of the water or if it was something else. But, the news reports were that, the Seine River was polluted. And so I did some research and found that, the city of Paris, they had been working for decades to try to clean the river. In fact,
Mm.
back in 1923, it became illegal to swim in the Seine River because it was so polluted. And so one of the goals of the Paris Olympics was the promise that it would clean up that river and use it as a venue for the Summer Olympics. And again, because of the triathlon, because people got sick, it ended up becoming really kind of a black eye. And it started making me think that, what are we facing with the 2034 Olympics here in Salt Lake City? What's the biggest sustainability issue that we face? We have two now, but the first one that came to my mind was our air pollution.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've been looking at for the last 10 years, I run a clean air contest with my colleague, Dr. Rosalind McCann, who's professor in the extension of natural resources. And one of the big challenges that we have here in the state of Utah is that we're prone to polluted inversions. And so we're expecting to have 500,000 tourists descend into the Salt Lake Valley in 2034, February 2034. February is one of our worst months for
Mm.
air pollution. And you start thinking about, are we setting ourselves up for, an inverted pollution? And what could that impact have in terms of having the world's cameras focused on the state of Utah, focused on the Salt Lake Valley? And if we have some big polluted inversion, is that going to be a major embarrassment? And in my research, I found out that we actually had a close call when it came to the 2002 games. So the day before the opening ceremonies in 2002, a polluted inversion cloud had descended onto the Salt Lake Valley. And so many of the organizers were panicked. And so just to kind of give you the context, back in 2002, the whole purpose of that opening ceremony, in fact, for the games, was to kind of introduce Utah to the world, that we
Hmm.
were a world-class city. We had the greatest snow on earth. I mean, talk about marketing. I mean, we were really promoting the idea that, that Utah was going to be the place to be in the wintertime for winter sports. Um, and then it was also post 9/11. So, what the opening ceremony was going to have was the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing the Star Spangled Banner. And
Hmm.
what they found was they had a tattered US flag from the World Trade Center that had been recovered. And that was going to open up the celebration. So it was going to be Utah's introduction to the world, but it was also going to be America's celebration of its resilience and perseverance after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And so this was a major event, and people were all excited that this was going to, this was going to be a tremendous success, but we had this inversion cloud. So this story just was published in the Salt Lake Tribune last year. So it's kind of an interesting story. It turns out that Utah got really lucky. The morning of the ceremony, a snowstorm came through the valley, blew all the inversion out, and it created fantastic weather for the next 17 days for the event. And the ceremony was a major success. But what's interesting about this is that Fraser Bullock, who is the person who spearheaded, who was the COO, so he was the chief operating officer under Mitt Romney for the 2002 games. He's the one who actually shares this story and talks about how panicked they were. But he says he's very concerned about 2034 and that are we going to have another inversion that could potentially embarrass the state? And so, what are the impacts? So if we have the world's cameras focused on the state and we have a potential inversion, is that going to hurt our business? Is that going to hurt tourism? Is that going to hurt the image of the state of Utah? And so those are some of the things that I am concerned about, and not just the optics, but also I'm concerned about the health of the athletes. And here's kind of one other thing that's kind of interesting is that back in 2022, we had really polluted air from some forest fires and wildfires that had filled Provo and Salt Lake valleys. And it was so bad that BYU actually canceled a football game because of the air pollution.
Mm.
And so, I mean, this is unheard of. BYU and football. I mean, that's like, that's so
Yeah,
important to
they
the
don't
university.
cancel games. Yeah.
No, they don't. And so here's the fear, and I don't know who would have the authority to do this, but would our air pollution be so bad that they would have to cancel events? I mean, can you imagine? And maybe I'm becoming too extreme to think about this, but this is one of the issues that scares me, given that we're going to have 500,000 more people in the valley, all driving to these events. We're setting ourselves up for a potential pollution cloud. So this is something that we need to figure out. How can we address and solve before the games come here? And to be candid with you, this can't be just solved the year before. I mean, we need to start now. We've got 9 years basically to get everything prepared. Fortunately, the venues are already in place. So really, we don't have to be thinking about construction. We need to be thinking about how do we, prevent this air pollution from potentially, damaging the image of Utah, damaging the state, and then worse, impacting the health of our athletes. Those are some of the things that concern me. And so that's some of the work that I'm working on now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that spotlight's going to shine just as brightly on our mistakes as it will on the positive things about Salt Lake. So we got to make sure that we get those things cleaned up. And I saw that you recently had a article published in the Salt Lake Tribune that's just about this very topic, and you go into some things that you think is causing the air pollution as well as some potential solutions. Um, what are like some things that you think just right off the bat we could do to
Absolutely.
start cleaning up the air?
So there are three things that are commonly talked about as causing our air pollution during the winter times, but there's actually a fourth one coming up. So I'll go through each of those. But first and foremost is the biggest contributor, and this is about 50% of our pollution in the wintertime comes from cars and trucks,
Mm.
comes from transportation. And I think a lot of people perceive that, oh no, it's the refineries or it's MagCorp or some of these big corporations that do industrial work in the valley, and they
Uh-huh.
do contribute, but people don't realize that really the most significant comes from just driving
Mm.
and people idling their cars, and so that's a big issue. The second one, and this is about 40% of our pollution, comes from smaller stationary sources, and that's going to be houses, buildings, restaurants, dry cleaners. So about 90% of our pollution comes from cars and trucks, and then just homes, just heating our homes with natural gas or propane, or I hate to say, some still use wood burning stoves. So that's another issue. And then the final part is kind of larger industry commercial facilities. So that would be your MagCorp and your, oil refineries and things of that nature. So we call those kind of the larger stationary sources. So those are the three main ones. But a new one that's emerging, and this is something that we've only started to think about maybe in the last 5 years, and that is the shrinking Great Salt Lake. And
Mm.
so one of the big challenges that we have now is that we're not getting enough water into the Great Salt Lake. And so we now have um, over 800 square miles of open bed shoreline that is now not covered in water.
Mm.
And some of that open bed of, is toxic with arsenic. Some of it is human caused, some of it's natural. But the point here is that we get these windstorms that blow across those sand areas and that, will blow it right into the Salt Lake Valley. And so one of the other fears that people have, so this is the second sustainability issue, but they're tied to wind or tied to air quality. And that is, if the Great Salt Lake continues to shrink, if we can't figure out how to get more water into the Great Salt Lake, are we setting ourselves up for even more air pollution
Mm.
simply because air or wind is going to blow that into the valley? And so we're going to have our cars and trucks. We've got our wood burning stoves and natural gas heating, all of those things that are contributing to air pollution. And now we've got the Great Salt Lake shrinking.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a pretty big misconception because when you hear about air pollution, I think at least I thought a lot of the time was like the biggest contributors were like these big companies and these large scale like planes and boats and all that kind of stuff. And so to find out that 50% of the air pollution is from like just personal vehicles and trucks is I think it's pretty eye-opening, and I think that that's just something a lot of people are ignorant about.
and it's challenging because let's face it, we need to commute to work. Okay, we
Right.
need to heat our homes. And so part of it is that we've just not designed our cities to be effective for commuting. And I think there's just been a heavy reliance on cars.
Hmm.
And if you go back to the East Coast, if you go to Washington D.C. and in New York City, I actually have a colleague who is even older than I am, and she has never driven a car. And when I ask her why, she says, "We don't need to. In New York, there's all
Uh-huh.
sorts of transportation and it's just you just rely on that. When we were in DC, it's just amazing how there's so much fantastic transit that you don't have to rely and have a car. But unlike Utah, here in Utah, I should say, we definitely need to have cars. And so part of the solution here is how do we try to improve mass transit, and that's really going to be important, particularly if we're going to be shuttling 500,000 tourists on top of our regular population and getting them to various venues up and down the Wasatch Front, from skating to skiing to snowboarding, all these things that we're going to have. Some of them are going to be in the Salt Lake Valley, some are going to be up in Park City. So we're going to have a lot of traffic going up and down I-80 to get people from their hotels wherever they're going to be up into Park City for the various events. And so one of the key solutions then is we need to electrify our transportation. And so one of the big proposals that we have is that we need to have electrified taxis and cabs. We need to have electrified buses. And I think what's really interesting is that electrified buses are now pretty commonplace. We don't have them all in Salt Lake City yet, but Park City has electrified buses. Zion National Park has all electrified buses. I was just in the San Francisco Bay Area earlier last month and was amazed how all the buses now are electrified. And what's good about this is that zero emissions. Yeah, I mean they do use electricity. The electricity is produced somewhere else, and yes, that electricity has emissions, but that would be outside of the valley. And so for us to be thinking about how do I get the air clean, at least where it's critical, electrified busing and transportation is going to be really critical. And
Hmm.
so some of the proposals we have is electrified cabs, electrified Uber and Lyft. We can strive for that. Even electric trucks. people don't realize that just the garbage trucks and trucks that we have hauling, bringing our mail, bringing our packages to our doors from Amazon. Increasingly, we need to have those electrified as well,
Hmm.
because once we can get those fleets in there, that will be an important way to really cut back on potential air pollution. So much of the proposals that I'm working on, and I'm working on an article with Dr. McCann, centers on how we can get these electrified transportation systems in place.
Hmm. Are these electric options like, are they financially comparable to like a gas vehicle? Because in class, you talked a lot about how a lot of green initiatives have to focus on like the benefits compared to the non-green products rather than being green products because people don't really care. So,
Absolutely. So, and a very, very good point. And so, one of the key things is that if you're going to sell a green product, it's got to be just as good as the non-green product, and it's got to be economical because people are not going to adopt a product unless it's economical. And so, what we're seeing with electric vehicles right now, and again, this is 2025, and the expectation is that electric vehicles are going to become increasingly more cost effective going forward. But what's nice about electric vehicles is that electricity is significantly cheaper than gasoline and diesel fuels. And so while your gasoline powered car may be cheaper right now up front, it costs significantly more to operate that vehicle over the next 7 or 10 years that you may own it.
mm,
Whereas with electric vehicles, yeah, they are more expensive up front. I mean, the prices are coming down, but just because electricity is so much cheaper and so much more cost effective, that in the long run, that should potentially help, in terms of the economics of these things. I think, when we talk about electrified busing and electrified trucks and fleets, the reason why Amazon is going electric, it's not because it's trying to be green, it's because they have found that electric vehicles are just more cost effective. If you're going to
mhm.
be running um, if you're going to be running trucks 24/7, and that's a lot of fuel and cost that you have to think about. And Amazon is a cost leader. One of the things it focuses on is trying to keep its costs down, and so it is figured out that electric vehicles are the way to go. What's interesting here is just living in Logan. I'm amazed as to how many Amazon electric trucks that I see driving day in and day out right here in Cache Valley. And so that is, that is for me is inspiring because it shows that here's a major corporation that's already gone, has become electrified, and so I think it demonstrates that the technology is viable, and within 9 years we can implement these fleets. The United States Post Office, which is on the road 6 days a week with its trucks, if we could electrify all those mail trucks that are by law have to be delivering mail 6 days a week, that could create significant reductions in emissions that we have. One of the big problems you have with many of these vehicles is that they have to idle, and that's probably when the cars are the most polluting,
Mm.
is when they are idling. And so when you're stopping at a mailbox and you're putting mail into mail slots, you're idling. And the car actually is most polluting when it's idling. The car has to be moving, and that reduces its its emissions. Excuse me. How it works is you have this catalytic converter. Catalytic converter has
Mhm.
to get up to 700 degrees. In order for that catalytic converter to get up to 700 degrees, the car has to be moving. And so when people warm up their cars on their driveway, they don't realize that the car needs to be moving in order for it to be most efficient in terms of its, burning away the
Oh.
emissions. And so allowing your car to sit and idle. And this is one of the big problems we have, is that if you're going to be transporting people, that means cars are going to be sitting idling at hotels, waiting for people to get into their, and so all that idling is really where it's going to get scary and dicey for a potential polluted inversion.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and the public transport vehicles idle a lot, so yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. Another thing we talked a lot about in class is, and like what you're trying to do with induction stoves is you have to make a product cool, you have to make it desirable and like people want to be seen in it. And I know that, I mean, at least here in the United States, there's kind of an aversion towards electric vehicles. Like they're not as tough and like, gas powered cars are cooler and that kind of thing. And especially here in Utah, we have a lot of like, it seems to be gas powered cars are a lot more popular amongst like,
Trucks. Yeah.
yeah, and trucks, the big cars, popular amongst like the
Yeah.
kind of the conservative base that we have here in Utah. Do you see that same sort of problem with like public transport? Like, do you see that same sort of aversion to
Yeah. Well,
electric?
and that's the thing is that, riding the bus may not be as sexy and cool as, driving a Tesla or driving a
Right.
sexy gasoline powered car. So I think many of these proposals that we have may not be necessarily aimed at individuals. I mean, it would be fantastic if we could get individuals to switch over to electric vehicles. I think many of the proposals that we're aiming at are at the cities and at various athletic sports facilities that are maintaining fleets of vehicles and encouraging those entities to switch over to electric vehicles simply because that's going to be where most of the driving and traveling will happen during the games. And if we can electrify all of those, that can potentially, reduce our pollution. There is one kind of interesting um, technology that is emerging and that we talked about in class a little bit, and that was Beta Technologies electric air taxis. And if you remember, we talked about this. The company actually came and demonstrated its technology here at the Logan Cache Valley Airport. I was unable to get tickets, so I missed it, but I was able to follow it online and through the news media. And what's interesting about this is that people of my generation will remember the Jetsons, which was a cartoon show where it showed people in these flying cars. And at first, I kind of dismissed this technology. I thought, oh, this is ridiculous, flying cars. But the more I read and the more I look at it, it very well could be a potential solution 9 years from now. And that is instead of clogging up all of our roadways with cars and potentially electric vehicles, if we did have some of these flying taxis, that very well may be the future. And what's interesting about these flying taxis is that the amount of fuel, the cost of the fuel of those things is really tiny compared to traditional helicopters and other types of air taxis that we have today, small aircraft and helicopters. And one statistic I found, which I thought was really interesting, is that for a typical helicopter, for a particular ride may be about $700 for a gas powered helicopter. For one of these electric air taxis to do the same thing, the fuel cost is only $17. So these electrified air taxis that Beta Technologies has developed really shows significant promise. Not only will it be clean in terms of transporting people through these electric taxis, but the cost savings compared to a traditional helicopter or a traditional airplane is
Mhm.
going to be amazingly, inexpensive. And so that in itself should be an incentive to try to get people to adopt these things. In terms of the induction stoves, and I've been working on, how do you make induction stoves cool? And there's a whole framework that we've talked about on that. But one of the things that we are proposing for restaurants is to switch from their gas stoves to induction stoves. And aside from just induction being significantly more efficient and a lot cleaner compared to gas, they're easy to clean. They cook in a heartbeat. And
Mhm.
so I think there's going to become an incentive for restaurants to want to switch over from kind of traditional gas to induction. And, I think there's a cool factor. I mean, men, they like to cook with fire, like the
Yeah.
cavemen. And that's all good and fine. But when it comes down to a restaurant making money, um, the sexiness of a gas stove is not going to be what cuts it. It's going to be what cooks food fast, quick,
Uh-huh.
clean, makes it easy to clean up. And the induction stove clearly is the better option in terms of just profitability for restaurants.
Hmm.
And there are a bunch of incentives now for people and restaurants to switch over to induction. Unfortunately, those are going to be canceled with the big beautiful bill that I guess just passed this morning. So, I mean, unfortunately, we won't have the tax credits for it, but I think from a sheer economic perspective, a lot of restaurants will start moving toward induction simply because it's so much easier to clean and it cooks so much quicker. And that will definitely improve air quality um,
Hmm.
during the games if we can get our restaurants to do that. So
You said the big beautiful bill did officially pass this morning.
I had lunch earlier and that's what I was watching on CNN. This was one of my challenges that before class I would have lunch and then I turn on the news and sometimes it was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I don't know what's going on now. But anyway, but at least kept me, for your class, it kept me, alert as to, hey, what was the latest news that I could share with you guys with my current events.
Yeah, I remember some of it would be a little bit heavy, but it was yeah, that's what's going on. So you said that the big beautiful bill has it's against induction
Yeah.
stoves?
So, well, what it's doing is President Biden had this bill or had this law called the Inflation Reduction Act, and President Trump did not like it. And so the Inflation Reduction Act was probably one of the biggest climate bills ever passed in the world. And it put literally billions of dollars of investment and incentives into green technologies, everything from incentives to buy electric vehicles, incentives to retrofit kitchens, and tax credits for your induction stoves, just a host of things. There were for solar panels, tax credits for wind power. There were all sorts of things in there. Much of that is going to be eliminated in the next year or so. And so, I mean, these industries are still going to exist. I mean, wind and solar are so cost effective that
Hmm.
they will continue. The challenge is that many developers who have put together proposals to build their wind farms and their solar farms are now suddenly going to see that the economics is going to change because now those tax incentives are gone. Now, some of your listeners may say, well, if these are so cheap, why do we have to have the incentives? Well, the challenge is that the fossil fuel subsidies have not been eliminated. And so what I think
Uh,
a lot of, green technology advocates or clean tech advocates are concerned about is that, one industry is being attacked, particularly now when we need as much of electricity as we possibly can. If as people are switching over to electric vehicles, as people are doing artificial intelligence, as people are doing more Bitcoin and the different cryptocurrencies and things, all of those things are incredibly energy intensive. And
mhm.
so it's unfortunate that we have the big beautiful bill is going to be eliminating all of these incentives that are building out a big portion of our electricity system. And so that is going to be a challenge for us going forward. I'm not sure what we can do at this point until we can kind of make an assessment as to what are some of the damages that the bill will have toward just clean energy. I know the state of Utah wants to develop nuclear power, and that's fine, but it's going to be 10 years or more before we get a nuclear power plant built. You can build a
Right.
wind farm and a solar farm in less than a few months. I mean,
Uh-huh.
so if we're serious about building out our electricity, I mean, the bridge to nuclear really is renewable energy. It's quick, it's
Uh-huh.
fast, it's cheap. And so to actually put disincentives now for probably the most practical form of power, it just, for me, it's not a good solution at this point. And so I think the renewable energy industry is going to have to figure out what to do to resolve that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been hearing a lot about the big beautiful bill, and I didn't even know they had stuff about gas in there. I've just been hearing about the tax related stuff, and it's always shocking, usually not in a in a good way, what I hear
Yeah, well,
what I hear
and
about.
that may be a whole new, I'm not the expert for that, but that may be a
Yeah.
whole other, podcast for you, is to talk about how, how the big beautiful bill might be impacting marketing and
Yeah.
content creation. I mean, that's I think that's really interesting. So
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it affects, I mean, a lot of different things going forward. Um, it was yeah, it was quite the bill. It had a lot of content. Um so kind of coming back to like the shrinking of the Great Salt Lake, do you see any like potential solutions for that? I don't know how we could
yes,
get more water into that, but
yeah. So here's our problem. We're the second fastest growing state in the union. Okay, so Utah, we're growing fast, and it's not just self generation, but it's also people coming here, which we have a wonderful state. So there's no question about that. But we're not getting any more water. And so what we need to figure out is we've got this water budget, and um, how are we going to allocate this water amongst more people? And so one of the things that I've been looking at, and again, earlier I worked in the wind industry and I helped kickstart the wind industry at Spanish Fork. Did some of the marketing of that, even made a documentary, Wind Uprising, and your
Mhm.
viewers can see that. It's on YouTube, so you can check that out. But one of the things that's nice about renewable energy is that it doesn't use water. And
Mm.
so I did some calculations a few years ago, and I published this in Utah Policy, which is kind of a website that's aimed at policymakers so they can understand how policies potentially impact the state. And I calculated that, we because we rely on coal, about 60% of our electricity comes from coal, and coal is a massive water guzzler. And so, as our governor is asking us to pray for rain and to pray for water, one of the things that we can do as well is also enact policies to get more renewable energy on the system. Wind and solar and batteries don't use any water. And so, if we are serious about our water issues, we need to figure out how do we build an energy infrastructure that doesn't use water. Now, the state of Utah is very excited about nuclear energy, and that definitely may be a solution. But as we understand nuclear today, nuclear is another big water guzzler. So, one of the
Mhm.
fears I have, are we switching from coal and natural gas to go to nuclear, and all we're doing is taking one big water guzzling form of energy and then we're replacing it with another water guzzling form of energy? And so, um, if that's the case, then we got to figure out, well, how are we going to reallocate our water? And again, I'm not saying that nuclear is not the future. It may very well be, but it's going to take 10 years for the first nuclear plant to get built here in Utah, if ever.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so the bridge to there needs to be renewables. And there are a lot of benefits to renewable energy. Some people say, oh, it takes up too much land. Well, the benefit of that is that those landowners who are able to host solar and wind farms, they actually get, they get royalties for having their land. They have lease payments. And so a lot of farmers that I worked with earlier when I was working in wind industry, they loved having wind turbines on their property because sometimes they'd have a bad year with their crop, but they
Mhm.
had guaranteed income because they had 10 wind turbines on their property, and that gave them sufficient income to, keep the farm going. So
Mm.
a lot of these arguments against renewable energy, that it takes up too much land, for me, it's like, well, a lot of landowners like that because they can then make money on that, and that, so it actually spreads the wealth in your community of when you have a wind project in your property. But the other issue too is water rates. We have some of the lowest water rates in the country here in Utah. And so that, that probably needs to be revised and rethought. So that way, if people paid more for the water, then they probably use it more sparingly. One of the big issues that is coming up in southern Utah right now is in order to, um, I guess, deal with the drought, is that they're planning to go to wastewater as a source for, for water. And so they call it, I know this sounds awful, but they call it from toilet to tap. And I know that
Hmm.
sounds awful. What it basically means is instead of just allowing wastewater to go to the treatment and then, you know, off into into some kind of pond or something, that you actually recycle the water, clean it, purify it, and then run it through the city again. The downside of that, well, that makes a lot of sense, in order to kind of reuse water that's in the sewage system. The downside is that then that water does not get into the Great Salt Lake. And so I don't have the solutions here, but this is something that we need to think about definitely before the Olympics, is how do we get water back into the Great Salt Lake and accommodate our booming, growing population. And so, I mean, I joke in class about, maybe we have to take fewer showers,
Hmm.
and maybe that might be part of it. But it's also going to be that we need to probably eliminate our Kentucky bluegrass and come up with ways to landscape in very water efficient ways.
Hmm.
And so there are a lot of things that we need to do in order to try to solve that problem. If anything, I want to maybe have your listeners understand that, these problems are complex. And so very often water policy is going to impact air quality, and that in turn is going to impact renewable energy policy. And so all of these things are interconnected. And for me as a marketer, these are all products. Renewable energy is a product, water is a product, clean air, believe it or not, is something that we all need. So it's a product. And so how do we convince people to want to act in ways in order to um, preserve our air and to have water get back into the Great Salt Lake and to solve some of these issues?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge with I mean with green these sustainability problems is like, the tragedy of the commons, right? Everybody
Yes. Yeah.
nobody wants to like it affects everybody, but nobody wants to take responsibility for it. So, everybody wants to have a lawn, but and like if everybody has a lawn, then like why does it matter if I have mine? Because no one else is changing. So it's a difficult problem to tackle because it's like it's hard to get people to change their behavior on an individual level when they
Absolutely.
don't see everybody else doing it.
Let me just share one little quick story with you, and because many of your listeners are probably thinking, so what is this marketing professor doing with, all of these sustainability issues? And
Hmm.
years and years ago, I was at this conference called the Greening of Industry Network, and there was a bunch of academics, government people, concerned citizens, and it was called the Greening of Industry Network. So, but I'm standing in line, and people are just kind of doing some chit chat, and somebody asked me, he says, "Well, what's your discipline?" And I say, "Marketing." And he says, "Marketing? What are you doing here? You're the enemy."
Yeah.
And I wish I could say that, oh, I had this great comeback and I was able to defend myself. I mean, obviously the guy was being sarcastic,
Right.
and we probably laughed it off. But
Hmm.
what it did was it got me thinking: is are marketers, are we seen as only that we cause consumers to buy stuff that they don't need, or that we focus so much on convenience that we have everybody throw away their plastic bottles and and convenience, etc. And I started thinking that, the very marketing tasks that have created environmental problems, well, our knowledge on product design, our knowledge on strategy, our knowledge on consumer behavior, all of those things can actually be used in benefit
Hmm.
of sustainability. And you look at the climate crisis. We have all the technology we need to solve climate change. We have electric cars, we have batteries, we have solar energy, we have renewables, we have all of these things basically to address climate issues. What's missing is the marketing,
Hmm.
getting consumers to adopt these technologies. And so when people ask me, like, "Well, Ed, why are you a marketing guy doing in sustainability?" And I'll say, you know what? Marketing is at the heart of sustainability.
Hmm.
We have to figure out how to convince consumers to change their behavior and to adopt the greener products and to adopt renewables. And that's kind of how I viewed my career. I've been in this area for researching the intersection of sustainability and marketing for over 30 years, and that's how I kind of look at it. I had a colleague who taught sports marketing, by the way. And this is many years ago. And he thought, he said, Ed, what are you doing in marketing? I mean, you do all this environmental stuff. Shouldn't you be over in natural resources? And I
Hmm.
told him, I said, well, you teach sports marketing. Shouldn't you be over in athletics? And
Yeah.
so, but then I think he understood that, I'm just studying sustainability in or studying marketing in the context of sustainability. He's studying marketing in the context of sports. We're studying marketing, but they're just different contexts. And so that's how I kind of view my career and my expertise and what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if you view clean air, you view water, all these things as a product, and which they are, people need them. Um, then super important part of getting people to adapt to practice or buy a product is communicating that product and getting people excited about it, and that's what marketing is all about, right? You can't sell a product that if nobody knows about it, nobody cares about it, then no one's going to adopt it. So, I mean, yeah, I think marketing is an important part of any product or movement or organization. It has to be. It has to be because marketing is all about getting the word out and getting people to care. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Totally
yeah.
agree.
Yeah, I mean, so um guess since you published that article in the Salt Lake Tribune, have you seen any like action be taken or have you seen anybody reach out? Has anybody reached out to you about it or anything like that?
Yes, I've had some people reach out to me. I think what's interesting right now is the Great Salt Lake is actually getting more press and getting more attention than air quality at this point. But I'm thinking that this article that I'm working on right now with Dr. McCann, we plan to, once we publish it, we plan to circulate it amongst Utah policymakers and Olympic organizers, so that way they can understand what are some of the things that need to be done. Sustainability now is actually one of the key pillars of the Olympic movement. So, you know, for Paris, it was cleaning up the Seine River, and they spent $1.5 billion to try to clean the river in time for the games, and they weren't successful. They created this giant tank that can hold 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, and that was supposedly to allow rainwater to flush into there, and they could try to keep the water clean, and it still didn't work.
Hmm.
But the benefit is that hopefully that system will improve and get better, and that the preparation for the games actually left a more sustainable water system for the Seine River, and that's what we're hoping with air pollution. Is that maybe this article, and maybe it's just the two of us at this point, but I know that there are others who are worried about air pollution, including Fraser Bullock, who is going to be part of the games preparations. He's the president now of the organizing committee.
Oh.
So I know that other people are concerned about it, and I think that if we can articulate here are very specific um, proposals that are working in other cities, and I mean, and that's the main point here is that we're coming up with solutions. I mean, aside from the flying air taxi, everything else that we're proposing works.
Uh-huh.
We have other cities that are doing it. So, for example, London, over half of the cabs in London now are electrified. And so if London can have over half, and I believe that they're continuing to build on that. But London, it's a big city, like 8 million people, and it can get polluted when you've got all
Hmm.
those cars moving 8 million people around. But recognizing that electrifying their cab system was a way to try to help clean the air up, Salt Lake City can definitely do that.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's not like we're going to be some bleeding edge, experiment. I think the proposals we have, we know that they work,
Hmm.
and that it can really boost the whole sustainability of Salt Lake City even after the games are gone. You know.
Right. And in the in those what was it, 2002 Sydney Olympics? It
Oh
was
yeah,
it was the Green Olympics. And
2000. It was the 2000
oh,
Sydney
2000,
Olympics. The summer.
2000.
Yes.
Um, and an organization called Greenpeace got involved, and they were kind of a big propellant of why that they were the Green Olympics. Is Greenpeace still around, and are they going to be
Uh,
involved?
it's interesting. Greenpeace has actually faced some challenges in court over some issues. I have not kept pace with it. I mean, I'm sure they're going to continue on as an organization, and but I know that they're facing some challenges, and I think it's partly political. But Greenpeace has been an organization. It started out back in the 1970s, I believe, when trying to save the whales. You probably saw the little boats of people trying to save the whales out on the ocean, and they were also anti-nuclear, and so they had a lot of protests. But what the organization did, it's interesting. It's considered to be a fairly radical environmental group. But what made it interesting is that it decided to use market and marketing strategies in order to promote a technology in the refrigeration industry. And I wrote several articles on this. This was some of my first early research on marketing of technology. And I'll be very candid with you. Refrigerators are not a sexy product, not like electric vehicles or solar panels, but it was a technology and it was a product that Greenpeace was marketing. And so one of the things it attempted to do was to uh, incorporate this technology into the preparation of the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. And how it managed to do that, because you think about it, most businesses are not going to allow an environmental group to be part of the development of the Olympics. I mean, it's a
Right.
pretty radical thing.
Hmm.
But what it did was the city of Sydney had a competition for the Olympic Village, and they asked architects and they asked construction people to submit plans for the development of an Olympic Village for the 2000 Games. So Greenpeace decided that it would submit something, and these were all anonymous, which made it interesting, but it would submit a plan of a totally green building. Now you got to remember, this is back in the early 90s. We're talking about 1992. So we're talking over 30 years ago. And so this was a pretty radical concept, the idea of that could we build an Olympic village, an Olympic venue that's completely, state of the art green technology, use of solar energy, use of fuel efficient cars for transit, et cetera. And so Greenpeace submits this proposal and they come out as one of the top 5 winners. And
Hmm.
because they were in the top 5, that gave them the legitimacy now of actually being an organizer, being part of the organization. And so anyway, so that's how they got their start there. And so they worked as both kind of partner and watchdog, I guess is for lack of a better term. So you've got this kind of prickly partner you're working with, because on one hand, they're helping you develop your bid to win the Olympics, but at the same token, they're going to be kind of the check on you to make sure that you live up to your environmental standards. So it was an interesting partnership for Greenpeace to be in.
Hmm.
But anyway, to make a long story short, they actually carried out, were part of the bid process. They helped organize, they designed all of this Olympics. And so the Sydney Olympics is seen as kind of the first green game Olympics. So this is really where environmental issues and sustainability became a major milestone. And so that was one of the reasons why I researched that particular subject, simply because the Olympics is a big marketing platform. And here was an example of where sustainability and green technology and products were now being implemented into the program. And so, they had all sorts of things from biodegradable packaging of food products to 2 million earthworms that were eating, compost as people were
Mm.
throwing food scraps and things. And so it was a really interesting, you know, uh, interesting hosting of the games. And ever since then, sustainability issues now have become critical for each of the development of other, Olympic events. And so the big outcome of this was the refrigerators, that they were not able to use this green refrigerant in the games, but they were able to convince Coca-Cola, Unilever, and McDonald's to switch over to this green technology for the next big Olympics, and that was going to be after Salt Lake, and that was in Athens in 2004.
Mm.
And what's interesting about this is that refrigerant that they were promoting has now become standard throughout the world. And so, in fact, Coca-Cola, only about 10% of its refrigerators now don't use this environmentally responsible refrigerant. And so,
Mm.
for me, it's really kind of an interesting example of how you could use the Olympics as a platform to promote a technology, again, a product that is better for the environment. And now, here, in 2025, it's become almost a standard
Mhm.
technology throughout. And so for me, this is really kind of an interesting example of how you can use the Olympics as a platform to advance sustainable principles.
Yeah, and if you can get some of these big corporations like Coca-Cola and McDonald's and and I read in your article that Unilever as well was making these green advancements. I mean that can make a huge difference, if they adapt
Absolutely.
these
So what was
commercial
interesting
products.
about this was Greenpeace got frustrated with Sydney, the city of Sydney, or the organizers, claiming that Sydney was not adhering to its environmental goals. And so Greenpeace decided that it would go after the sponsors. And so it was kind of interesting at first because Coca-Cola said, "Hey, we're just sponsoring the Olympics. We're not here to be green." And yet Greenpeace said, "Well, you're going to be refrigerating all of these drinks, and they're all going to be bad for the environment. They were going to be contributing to climate change." And Coca-Cola did not want to have this negative reputation. I mean, they had spent millions of dollars to be a sponsor for the Olympics, and
Hmm.
now Greenpeace was criticizing them for that. And so they were kind of under pressure
Hmm.
to switch. And to their credit, they did. And and then Coca-Cola literally became um, the lightning rod to actually move the world toward this better refrigerant. And I could give you all the technical information about hydrofluorocarbons and chlorofluorocarbons and everything. I don't think your listeners want to, hear all that, but I'll just say that the bottom line is that today that green refrigerant is now standard throughout the world. And much of that can come from the 2000 Sydney Olympics. What happened there literally helped open the doors and
Yeah.
open the markets for that. So
Has there been any other like large corporations that like took like big steps in sustainability from like later Olympic games that you know of or um
I'm not aware of, and here's
okay.
why. Because I think, but I'll explain why. Is that because I think many of the companies will come and sponsor the Olympics, but you didn't have an environmental group that was involved with the preparations. So I
Uh-huh.
think that's what made Sydney unique. Was you had this
Oh, okay.
radical environmental group that was part of the organizing of the games. I mean, this is unheard of. I mean, I think people today would still think this is radical. I mean, I don't think Salt Lake City is going to allow Greenpeace to be a partner, to be candid
Yeah.
with you, So, and so that is what I think made it so instrumental. And that's not to say that these other cities are not doing good things. The city of Paris, one of the programs they did was the entire games was fueled completely by renewable energy. And what part of the programming was is that all of that electricity that was used for Paris had to be new renewable energy plants. And so what's interesting is that all that electricity is now being used throughout Paris and throughout France afterwards. And so the games motivated the development of all this renewable energy, and now the country of France is benefiting from that. And so my sense is, one of the programs or one of the proposals that we have for Salt Lake is that we too should be 100% renewable energy. And that's going to take a lot of development of renewables to be developed throughout the state of Utah. But the benefit is that that's still going to be there after the games are gone.
Right.
And so the legacy of the games could be that we're going to have all this new renewable energy on the system. And so those are some of the things that I think are important, that the Olympics can create a big environmental headache. I mean, think about all the construction, all the new roads. The games come here, you're going to have 500,000 people polluting, consuming, throwing garbage. I mean, there's going to be a big environmental footprint because of hosting the games. But if you can have, this infrastructure as part of the legacy that leads to, clean energy generation, or to have fully electric bus systems and taxis and things of that nature. All of that's going to stay here after the games are gone. And that's going to be a fantastic legacy of the games.
Absolutely. I mean, and I hope all these things get implemented.
It'll be, that's part of my work. So I'm going to share the work. And then after that, I got to
Yeah.
become an activist. So, so part of my research, I'll be very honest with you. I'm an academic researcher, but I use my research as part of activism, quite frankly, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, I'd love to be involved too if you need me. I don't know you'd need me for, but
Sure.
um, you know, um, I'm 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 passionate about these sustainability things and the Olympics. So, if that's ever something that if you ever think of something I can help with, then I'd love.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
appreciate your volunteering.
Yeah.
I'll definitely tap into you. So
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully we can adapt some of these things for the Olympics, and if not, I guess we can just have our governor pray for rain.
yeah, pray for rain. Yes. So
Hopefully another miracle the night before can sweep all the
yes, yes,
the
sweep all the, hopefully that'll happen.
yeah.
Um, but if not, but we can at least say that we prepared and we did the best we could in order to avoid a polluted inversion. So, and that's
Absolutely.
the whole purpose of the work that I'm doing now.
Great. Well, I think that's about all I got. I don't want to take too much more of your time. So, I mean, I appreciate you. I learned a lot. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to thank you again for for your interest in my work, and I hope your listeners find this of interest and they know where to find me. So I'm, Utah State University. If they're interested in any of the articles that I've written, I'm more than happy to share those links with them.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been the third episode of the Clicks and Creators podcast. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you guys on the next one.